We are live. What's up, everybody? Welcome here to Pop Culture Philosophers. It's time for Rockin Robbie Live with, first of all, my co-host tonight, the Brianiac.
I think we got it right.
Yeah, Brianiac. That's right. I like it. See, you make it confusing with all those extra vowels, Brian, that are unnecessary.
They are unnecessary, and I like them. I'm keeping them.
Thank you for being here and covering up the puke wall just a little bit. That's really exciting, so I'm very happy for that.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Okay.
I try my best.
Our very special guest, though, is David Pepose, who is the writer of some of my favorite comic books. You've heard us talk about him here on the channel, including Going to the Chapel, Spencer and Locke, Spencer and Locke 2, which is even crazier, I think. And I love his work, and I'm very excited, David, for you to be here. We're going to be talking about your new book, which is on Kickstarter right now. Link is down in the description. Trust me. You want to join me in support of this book. It looks amazing. So, David, thank you for being here. Why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are, what you do, and the OZ.
Well, thank you so much, Robbie, for having me and for the wonderful introduction. You really hit the nail on the head. I'm the writer of Spencer and Locke 2, and the upcoming Spencer and Locke 3, Going to the Chapel, and the upcoming Grand Theft Astro, and my new book on Kickstarter, the OZ, which is like what if Mad Max and the Hurt Locker took place in the Wizard of Oz. So I couldn't be happier to be on the show to talk about it. Our Kickstarter the response has been overwhelming, and we are climbing towards our next stretch goal, which is going to be giving all physical backers our Winged Monkey Squadron sticker. If you like books like or if you like things like The Old Guard or Fables, or just are a fan of the Wizard of Oz, or if you just like my previous work on Spencer and Locke, you're definitely going to love the OZ.
Yeah, it looks amazing. The artist is
Ruben Rojas, and colorist Whitney Kogar.
How did you get them involved in the project?
Yeah, they're terrific. I found Ruben on Twitter. He was responding to a call for artists, and we've known each other now for a couple of years. I think I found him in 2018. So this book's been in the works for a little while, and I loved Ruben's style so much that I pitched him 3 projects on the spot. I talked with him about the OZ. I pitched him the then unacquired Grand Theft Astro, and a 3rd book that I'm sort of redeveloping right now. And Ruben is a huge fan of fantasy. He loves post-apocalyptic stuff. So the OZ really kind of hit him right where he lives. Whereas Whitney and our letter DC Hopkins, they're both recommended to me by my friend Michael Mocchio, who I was his editor once upon a time at Newsarama. He's since gone on to do amazing things at Boom Studios and Scholastic and Mad Cave. And Mike was saying, if you want to work with somebody, you really need to work with Whitney and DC. They're both terrific collaborators. And he really did steer me in the right direction. They're both terrific. Whitney really is so additive to Ruben's work. She really kind of takes his impeccable line art and takes it to the next level. And I think DC does the same thing for me with my dialogue. And they're both so considerate with how they work on our work and how they interact with each other. And, our team really works in a nice positive feedback loop. I think we're all so stoked to see what everybody's work does and how it builds on what we've done, that it really has inspired us all to bring our A game to the point where I have written the entirety of the series already, because I was so inspired by Ruben's artwork that I had told him, come hell or high water, I will get this book made. So keep working. So far, just seeing how people have responded just to Ruben and Whitney and DC's first 11 pages. This Kickstarter, we've got 33 more pages to go. And it's really going to knock you out. I'm very excited about it.
It looks amazing. If you just go to the Kickstarter link, you'll see the artwork and the coloring, everything looks so great. It looks really neat. And like, you immediately sold me. The first time I saw it, like, you had mentioned it on Twitter, and you were like, yeah, Hurt Locker, Mad Max, and Wizard of Oz. And I was like, back now. I'm like, it's not even out yet. I'm ready. I'm just like, come on, let's get going. You really launched this like crazy, dude. You had a lot of people. You built that hype really well. Was this your first Kickstarter?
First ever Kickstarter.
Wow, you did it excellently well.
Thank you. It's one of those things. I've been really fortunate. I'm friendly with people like Charlie Stickney, the creator of White Ash, which I consider to be kind of the original comics Kickstarter success story. My buddy Rylan Grant just recently completed his Kickstarter for his book, The Jump. Russell Nahelty, who's currently running a Kickstarter right now for Ichabod Jones. Pat Shand of Destiny New York fame. A whole who's who of Los Angeles comics creators who have all had success on Kickstarter. And so I find myself fortunate that I was able to kind of work with that brain trust and sort of build on that platform that I've developed with Spencer and Locke and Spencer and Locke 2 and Going to the Chapel. I feel really fortunate. I feel like the comics industry really kind of came together in a big way to lift this project up. We had so many readers and members of the press and retailers and comics creators all help signal boost us. And I think that's the reason why I think we're closing in on our 950th reader at this point. We're getting pretty close to that. Nice. So it's been a long time coming. The OZ has been in development since the first volume of Spencer and Locke came out. That's kind of how long it takes sometimes to get these books over the plate. And for those who haven't read the Kickstarter, what we've done in this book is we've recontextualized Dorothy Gale killing the Wicked Witch of the West as something like a botched regime change. And so when Dorothy clicks her heels together and returns home to Kansas, she's inadvertently left Oz in this power vacuum that leads to decades of brutal civil war. And so we pick up a generation later with Dorothy Gale's granddaughter, who's a disillusioned Iraq war veteran. And she's really come back home to Kansas with some real scars and some real trauma and some real guilt. And she's trying to put the pieces of her life back together. Unfortunately, when a tornado strikes, this new Dorothy finds herself trapped in the war-torn land of Oz. So she's going to have to navigate her past and her grandmother's former friends if she hopes to survive the occupied zone, or as the locals call it, the OZ. It's... after Spencer and Locke, I wanted to do something in a different genre. I thought science fiction and fantasy would be like a nice big swing. And I kind of stumbled upon this idea just kind of with a little bit of wordplay and realized, Oz could be an acronym for something. It could be like DMZ. It could be the occupied zone. And then I realized, this is a war book. And as over the past year plus, as we've gotten Ruben on board with art and as we've gotten Whitney on colors and DC on lettering, I've realized, this is a much more sweeping story than I could have ever expected. Something I talked to Whitney about was, what's the Mad Max version of Star Wars look like? And I think we're really kind of coming up on that here with the OZ. It's very exciting, and I feel like there's a lot of potential to this story, and having written it, I think we're really going to be able to stick the landing in a big way.
Now, did you wind up going back and reading the original Oz stories, or did you just rewatch the movie?
So I actually read the Oz novels in college. I wrote a term paper in adolescent literature saying how L. Frank Baum had built sort of a prototypical superhero universe. How over the course of 20 novels, he had built on mythology and continuity in just the same ways as the Marvel Universe, but he did it decades before Stan and Jack ever showed up on the scene. So it was nice kind of going back to those roots a little bit. And, for me, the balancing act has been, unlike in, say, Spencer and Locke, where Bill Watterson had 10 years of strips, but you'd be surprised at like how quickly you can kind of burn through that mythology. For Oz, it is very much like the Marvel or the DC universes. There's so much that you can dig in. Yeah. And yet, like you said, with the Judy Garland film, that's kind of the popular consciousness of Oz. And so it's really kind of walking that high wire act of what is most accessible to a universal audience while still being able to add in these Easter eggs with different locations and characters that speak to the more diehard Oz fandom. And so, we focus a lot on the core quartet that you might expect of, Dorothy, the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, the Lion, but the twists that we're able to take on these classic characters since we've seen them last, we've got some fun stuff in store. And we do have a few, side characters that I think we've got some really cool stuff going on with. The Wizard of Oz, we've got a really fun twist on that I think is going to be a fan favorite. Jack Pumpkinhead from Return to Oz.
Nice.
He's always been a favorite of mine. He plays a pretty big role in our second and third issues. And then also just kind of peppering in different locations that we might not have seen in the original L. Frank Baum novel, we might not have seen in the Judy Garland film. Places like the Deadly Desert or the mountaintops of Ix. For me, it feels a lot like, and this is why I brought up Star Wars earlier, that same sense of sweeping scale with the locations. It's just like you have the difference between Tatooine and Hoth and Dagobah and Cloud City. I feel the same way about the OZ. We've got the bombed out Emerald City, the Deadly Desert, the mountaintops of Ix, the Gnome King's Castle, all these different places have their own very individual temperatures and vibes and internal high concepts and hazards to explore. And I think that makes the scale and stakes of this story exponentially bigger as a result.
Cool. Brian, have you ever read the Oz books at all?
I have read the first one, and I've got them all on my Kindle, but yeah, it's there's a lot of them.
Yeah, 20 of them.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say 20 of them, and that's not even counting adaptations. Oz is, by virtue of it being the novels being in the public domain, there've been a lot of reinterpretations. Everything from Wicked to Return to Oz to what we're doing. And it's funny because ever since we made this project live, and I've been teasing it in my newsletter, Pep Talks, as Project Saffron for the better part of a year. At least every week somebody tells me, "Oh, have you heard of this adaptation?" And I'm like, no. Now I feel like I have to check all these adaptations out. It's just I mean, Oz, it already has a wide mythology, and there are so many people who find something new and interesting to mine from it. And I think that just speaks to the richness of L. Frank Baum's archetypes and world building that he established in just dating back to the first novel.
It's always been crazy to me that they've done, like, that movie is such a monumental, ever since 1939. It's just like so popular, right? Yeah. And it's so weird to me that they've never really been able to explore that out more fully in cinema. Like, people have tried, like Sam Raimi tried to kickstart something, or not kickstart something literally, but more like kickstart my heart, right? But but it's just, I don't know, it's such a rich world now. I've never read all those. I bought one of my ex-girlfriends the entire set one time. I was like, it's just 5 books, right? And then I look, it's like, no, each one of these is like 5 novels. Like, what the hell is going on, man?
It's a lot. And I think you hit it right on the head, is that Oz, the Wizard of Oz, dates so far back and is such kind of seen as like a perfect piece of pop culture that it's hard to build on it. I think that's why so many people do remixes of it, is because the core components are already there. It's akin to, hopefully this is not blasphemy, akin to Chris Claremont's X-Men, where that's the text, of X-Men, and people, you find people try to add to it, but it's always, it almost resists those additions. I mean, there's a whole laundry list of ancillary X-Men that have been added on since the Claremont years, and they don't usually stick, or they sort of show up as a pet character later on, or Hickman will kind of mine them for continuity. But it's that core group that Claremont put together, and you can sort of you can really kind of maybe lop it off at Kitty Pryde, or maybe you can add in Psylocke or Bishop, or Jubilee. But once that Claremont run ends, everybody's doing remixes of that because it was so good and so foundational that trying to add to it almost feels like a rejection of a new organ. It takes a lot to sort of fit that in a way that sticks. And that was definitely something that we thought a lot about for the OZ, or at least that kind of went in my head, was, how can we remix it, and how are there things that can be additive to it that sort of will still fit general structure that Baum left, or that the Judy Garland film left. And I think we're able. There was one character in particular that we without making spoilers, there's one character in particular that we had to really kind of take some decent liberties with. But I think the way that we did it fits perfectly in the structure. And so I think that character fits in really nicely as a result. And yeah, but for me, it's always sort of being cognizant of like, okay, what's that team dynamic from the original? And how can we keep that dynamic intact while still exploring different character angles and different developments that these characters have been through in the intervening generation?
Well, Sam Fett, and there's a lot of great people out there right now watching from the PCP Army. Sam Fett says, already sold me on the OZ.
Thank you.
Yeah, 100%. Click that link down in the description below. Brian, I'm throwing it to you for a moment.
Well, yeah, I was going to say I was pretty excited when I saw you were writing that and backed it, and I think I might be able to convince my wife to read that one. The Wizard of Oz is her favorite movie, and
yeah.
But actually, when we got married, she had the ruby slippers on, and then walked down the aisle to the Hawaiian version of Over the Rainbow.
That's lovely.
Everything. So it was and I was explaining it to her today, and the power vacuum and all that stuff,
Mm-hmm.
and then I got super excited when I saw that sticker for that flying monkeys thing. I'm pretty excited about that one. That's pretty cool. But yeah, I mean, you kind of spoke a lot to it, but one thing I've noticed recently is that the Wizard of Oz and that kind of world keeps popping up in lots of different ways, and I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on why that was, I mean, because I love that movie too, and I remember growing up. But yeah, I was just I was wondering if
yeah, I know. I think I think some of it. I think maybe it's too much conjecture on my part, but I think especially where we are today, I think we're in very tense and anxiety-inducing times, and when that happens, we do tend to look to our past. We look to that nostalgia as something comforting, as sort of that touchstone, and at the same time, I think at least for me, maybe as just as a storyteller, but I think also as a consumer of entertainment, is that I look back to those properties and I recognize that they were simple. I recognize that they weren't always the deepest reads. It was sort of that sense of spectacle and wonder. And so when I return to these things as an adult, I think, okay, it's almost like the phenomenon of a gourmet grilled cheese sandwich, where you're like, there's that comfort, but how do we add more depth to sort of appeal to that more adult palate? And I mean, for me, the thing that I liked about the idea of the OZ, and I never initially set out to do a Wizard of Oz riff. It just kind of, the Wizard of Oz happened to back into this fantasy idea that I wanted to do. But I think for me, it's always when I do a parody like this, and this was the same case for Spencer and Locke, does the original text support my thesis? Because it'd be really easy to do like a story like Elmo cooking meth in Oscar the Grouch's trash can. But that's the next issue of Ice Cream Man, I think. Yeah. But like for me, that's just shock for shock value sake. There's no emotional engagement. There's no audience investment. So you can get your foot in the door once with that, but nobody's going to come back for more. They'll look at the car accident once. But for me, Spencer and Locke, like the idea of Calvin having so vividly imagined Hobbes, it made sense that I was like, oh, well, what if that was like a symptom of a darker pathology? What if his upbringing was so traumatizing that was his kind of his escape valve? And the same thing for the Wizard of Oz. I grew up during the invasion of Iraq. I was in high school. And so the idea of, if you look at the original Wizard of Oz, Dorothy kills 2 wicked witches, convinces the wizard to leave, and then splits. And it's like in the span of a couple of days. if you've ever seen the Judy Garland film, they try to wrap it up in a neat little bow, but that's not how it would work in the real world. I've seen it. It would look more like Baghdad. It would look more like Game of Thrones, because Dorothy has knocked out these power figures in the community. There's going to be a power vacuum, and people are going to be fighting for a piece of the pie. They're going to be fighting to stabilize that the country, because that's the ugly truth about these dictators, is that it's not just that they're ruling through fear and power, although that is part of the arsenal. It's this control. They've consolidated it, and they've got their tendrils and everything. And so when you uproot them, you'd be shocked at how many other key pieces of infrastructure get uprooted along with them. And I think the original text really supported that, and it gave me an angle with our new Dorothy being an Iraq war veteran, where I was able to kind of explore the themes of trauma that I think have popped up in my previous work, whether it's Spencer and Locke or even lighter things like Going to the Chapel. Being able to explore that, but build on it. Dorothy's journey is both to confront her past trauma, but also it's grappling with the burden of leadership. It's her asking herself the morality of war. How do you make a just decision when every choice you make can wind up with someone dead? And, is there a way to escape that cycle of violence? Is there a better way of doing this? Dorothy's not going to have easy answers, but sort of her grappling with that's going to play a major role in her emotional journey for this series.
One thing that you said got me thinking. You said that you had kind of wanted to dive into a fantasy sci-fi type thing. You were coming up with some ideas, and that Oz kind of it fit, right? And that worked.
Yeah.
But with Spencer and Locke, did that start from the idea of, I want to do Calvin and Hobbes in a different way?
Yeah. Well, so for me, it's the riff always comes secondary. So for Spencer and Locke, and keep in mind, I kind of had to convince myself to write that. I didn't consider myself a comics writer at the time. I thought for sure I was going to be an editor or a development executive, and me writing a comic, talk about me putting the cart before the horse. I had thought, oh, well, if I'm able to prove that I can break down a story, I could be a better position for these jobs. Not realizing, hey, idiot, if you can do this job right, maybe you should just do this job. And so I had thought, Frank Miller was really formative on my sensibilities as a creator, as a kid. He was the first writer whose voice stood out to me. And so I thought, I want to do something in that vein. If I only write one comic, that's the homage I want to do. And I thought, what's the weirdest thing that I could throw up against Frank Miller? And when I stumbled upon thinking Bill Watterson, that's kind of the idea clicked, and I realized, oh, okay, there's something to this high concept. Because if you have like a Marv kind of detective and he's all beat up and he's carrying a stuffed animal with him, then you immediately start thinking, oh man, first off, that guy's not in a healthy place. But then you're like, how did he get there? What was his home life like? What was his upbringing? That story really kind of clicked. And there's the same thing with the OZ, where I said I wanted to do fantasy, and I had looked up just like inspirations, just to be like, hey, what's the mood board here? And I had written down things like Lord of the Rings and Lloyd Alexander and Piers Anthony and Harry Potter, and I wrote Wizard of Oz. And it just so happened that seeing my cursor flashing on the word Oz, that was just like, oh, okay, that there's a story to that. And I'm always a big believer in the value of a good pun. I am an actual certified Punderdome champion, and for their competition in Brooklyn every month. And so for me, oftentimes finding titles is just like, what's like the title that kind of has like a different meaning to it. And so I've found a lot of titles that way. Grand Theft Astro was another thing where I was like, oh, I have this idea of people who are racing spaceships in space, and somebody has accidentally ripped open a wormhole that's thrown them in time, and they've got to now go on a heist to get their way back. And for me, if I can't think of a good punchy title to go with that, it's the idea doesn't feel fully baked to me. But yeah, something like the OZ, I was like, oh yeah, that that tells you exactly what this book is about immediately. And when you see Ruben Rojas's main cover, it all falls into place. You know, seeing Dorothy as this disillusioned soldier, kind of giving us this haunted look, and seeing the Tin Soldier as this sort of hulking, rebuilt War Machine freedom fighter. You're like, yeah, okay, I get this. It's the Mad Max Fury Road version of this. And the fact that we're able to kind of go back and say, oh no, look at the text. The initial text says that we could wind up right here. I think that lends a certain weight to it, because people feel like it'd be easy to call it a remix at best, or a fan fiction if you're really giving it a bad faith read. But for me, I always try to say, how could this be an actual sequel? You know, something that organically fits with the story you've read before. And I think that really helps build our reader's sense of investment.
Yeah, I like that it is a sequel too, because like, yeah, you get a lot of properties that just kind of get like, oh, we'll just restart it, you know, and stuff like that, and it kind of gets a little tiresome there, you know. But
right.
Yeah, one of the main things I remember from reading it, the first one, is that L. Frank Baum was trying to write, you know, a different type of children's story that wasn't the Grimm's fairy tales and all that stuff. So, yeah, I like that you brought up that he basically kind of created a different universe, but it's also, you know, I mean, he wasn't trying to. I think he was trying to avoid moralizing, like in the Grimm's fairy tales, but you still end up doing it, right? You know,
yeah.
I mean, kind of do some compelling stories, you're end up going to have to moralize somewhat. So,
right. Yeah, I mean, and you know, I think that's an excellent point, because I feel like as a storyteller, you want to add your own point of view, and you want to make sure that there's a point to it. And I think if you can't lend your own point of view, it's almost a little bit of narrative cowardice. For me, it's always about, you know, how can we tell a compassionate story? You know, how can we show our characters some empathy and give them some catharsis? Because I think that's the thing that a lot of readers are searching for. There are people who live with mental illness and trauma and PTSD and guilt and disillusionment. And I feel like, you know, you don't have to have served to have dealt with any of those things. And so for me, though, I always want to be careful, because there are people who have dealt with this stuff, who have served, and I never want them to feel like I think their plight is a punchline. And so, yeah, I feel like for me, you know, for me, it's always about, you know, the human element, and sort of being, I think forgiveness and self-forgiveness is a really powerful thing. And it's something that I think my characters are always struggling with. And maybe that's something that I'm struggling with, who knows? You know, but I think, I think if you don't have a point of view to your story, if you're not able to weigh in somewhat, then it's sort of rudderless. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't have that weight. But if you're able to give it, I think, a clear point of view, and I think even Baum to some extent did the same thing. You're able to leave something with your readers, and you're able to maybe not shape public opinion, because I think that's an awfully hoity-toity way of thinking about comic writing. But I think you're able to at least have your readers think about something, and you know, and sort of take them away a little bit. And that's the only thing I can hope for as a creator is, you know, we leave our readers in a good headspace.
Yeah, it's if not, right, it's just a series of events, right?
Yeah.
So, it's like what do you have to think about afterwards?
Yeah, exactly. Like, you know, it'd be easy to just be, you know, making this just purely scenario based. And for me, I consider the best kind of writing the intersection between high concept and emotional engagement. And so, you know, if you focus enough on your characters, I think the themes become self-evident as a result. I'm definitely not the type who's saying, who sits down and says, I've got a real theme that I want to explore here. For me, it's always, you know, what genre am I playing in, and what are the characters like? And as I sort of play around with them a little bit and kind of practice their speech and try to get in their heads a little bit. As their journey starts to unfold, I start realizing like, okay, this is kind of their self-deception. This is the thing that they're having a tough time getting over. This is how I can keep exploring it. But yeah, I think the characters themselves, they're the ones that really kind of cement the themes for me. And oftentimes I'm not 100% sure what those themes are until I've kind of gotten in the thick of it a little bit more. And I start to, it feels more like excavating than full out inventing.
Heck yeah. Our buddy Jay Strick, member of the Excitable PCP crew, he had read Going to the Chapel and he really liked it. And so when he found out that you were coming onto the show, he was like, what else has he done? I was like, have you read Spencer and Locke? Me and Brian spoke to him on Wednesday for like 30, 40 minutes, just pumping it up. Right.
Oh, thank you.
So Brian, he read it last night. He came into work today and he's like, dude, this book was awesome. And he was like, I love the Calvin and Hobbes, but what really compelled him was the trauma of the past and things like that. He felt very connected to that.
Yeah.
And he loved it so much, dude. So you're still winning over new readers, even with Spencer and Locke, which is so great.
That's what I love. I felt this way a lot with Spencer and Locke too, is that, I feel like we got actually more readership for the first one. There were so many people who had heard about our first volume, but for whatever reason weren't able to pick it up. And so we experienced a nice spike in our first volume sales as well. And once I sort of get my ducks in a row and finish writing volume 3 and we get the art ready on volume 3, I really do think we'll see a spike in the previous 2 volumes. That's really nice as a comics creator because, these books so often have a finite shelf life. And that's something I've always struggled with and something I've always fought against is that I consider, and maybe this is because I'm still kind of young in my career, but I consider all of my books my babies. And I try to future-proof them as best I can. I don't want to lock it into a particular time period. I want to make the themes as accessible and universal as possible, or I should say the concepts. So yeah, it's nice to have people kind of still discovering my previous work. And that's something that I really thought was important for this Kickstarter. And that's why with every single tier that we have, starting with $5 and up, you get the first issue PDFs of Spencer and Locke and Going to the Chapel. That's every single tier. And part of that was because I wanted to give more bang for your buck, but also I wanted to introduce more people to my work. There are people who have never read any of my stuff before who are really wonderfully throwing in on the OZ. And it's nice to be able to say, oh, hey, by the way, if you like this, there's more. And we've got special deals involving all 3 trades as well. But yeah, I've always, with all of my books, and this is the reason I did Kickstarter as well, it's always been about how do we invite more people to the table? How do we build that wider consensus? And the idea of sort of introducing my direct market readers and introducing the Kickstarter readers and kind of having them break bread together, that's something that's really inspiring for me. And I think it's the only thing that will really kind of help us future-proof ourselves as creators, especially when times are as chaotic as they are today.
Absolutely. I think your work is incredibly evergreen. I really, really do. Like Going to the Chapel is, to me, aching for somebody to adapt it into a film. Like,
fingers crossed.
When I read that, I was just like, this is so, your dialogue, the pacing of it, Gavin's artwork, everything about it just blew me away. I got an early copy when I met you in Charlotte last year at Heroes Con. And by the way, David is such a great pitch guy. He is like a Carnival Parker out there.
It's true.
I was walking by. He was like, do you like Calvin and Hobbes? Do you like Sin City? Do you like Die Hard? Do you like Wedding Crashers? Come check out our books. And then I think that was you. I think you told me that was the first time you and Jorge had done a show together.
It was the first time we'd ever done a show together. It was the first time we had ever met face to face.
That's super cool.
Yeah, hopefully one day in the future we'll get to do cons again. I miss them.
Yeah, right.
Yes. Especially because I'm going to be excited to have more books to show when convention season reopens. But yeah, it's funny. I had signed up for 16 conventions this year. I only got to do 2 of them. It almost feels like a whole other lifetime ago. But you're absolutely right that, and you're not the first person to use the word Carnival Parker when it comes to my sales pitching at cons. And yeah, I mean, it's like having, I don't frame my books around it, but the way that I pitch my books, I always try to find what's the comp title, what's the touchstone here. If you're a fan of Calvin and Hobbes, you will probably like Spencer and Locke. If you are a fan of Die Hard or Ocean's 11, you will probably like Going to the Chapel. For the OZ, the first thing I'm going to say is, do you like Mad Max? Having those sorts of touchstones, and I hope I'm not talking out of school for the comics industry, because I love the comics industry. But I feel like there were certain measures we had to take in the 80s and 90s to survive. And as a result, I think sometimes we're a little bit more esoteric and insular than we should be. We're not, the mainstream comics industry is not necessarily a friendly or inviting place for new readers. And it's, I think, perhaps getting less so every year. For me, I see our wagons being circled, and it makes it harder for us to do outreach. And for me, my thought as a creator is, I don't want to preach to the choir. I want converts. And so, I love Spider-Man. I love Marvel. I love DC. I love Batman. If one of the majors ever called, I'd be hard pressed not to answer the call. But while I'm doing my creator-owned work, and I have that freedom to say, I'm only going to work on the things I want to work on, I want to make sure that I can hand this book to a stranger and they'll actually get it. I think if you really boil it down, a storyteller's job, whether it's a comics creator or film or television or music or any medium you want, it's the art of making a stranger give a damn. Because like, I've worked hard on this book. I'm enthusiastic, and that's because like some of it's because I love the concept, but some of it's like also sunken cost fallacy. Like I've spent a lot of time in the trenches working on this, and it's a lot of blood and sweat and tears. And so you better love it, because otherwise you wasted a whole lot of time. But as a consumer of entertainment, I'm sure you guys feel the same way. It's very easy to not have any sentiment when something's not rubbing you the right way. I mean, I tried watching Project Power last night. I made it about 10 minutes and I was just like, nope, not for me. And the fact that like I just changed the channel and just said nope, if you look at it like with a human being on the other end of it, that's like ice cold. But we are not programmed that way. We're just programmed, does the entertainment entertain me or not? Is it can I get into this or not? Can I lose myself or not? And I think comics, our big challenge is that we veer so esoteric with the concepts that we lose the human core, and we make it impossible for a newcomer to understand it. And I've always said, if I want to be able to I have a lot of conventions where people say, oh, well, I don't read comics. And I always tell them, you're the target audience. I want lapsed readers. I want people who are curious about reading and have never done so. I want people who are burned out from the big two. I certainly, when I started writing Spencer and Locke, I was a little burned out by the direct market. And I realized, I think subconsciously, that I needed to change my relationship, that I either needed to make the books that I wanted to read or I needed to get out. And so, yeah, it's something that I'm always thinking about when I'm coming up with new concepts is this something that I could explain in one sentence to a stranger and get them excited? And if the answer is no, then this is not the idea to pursue.
Yeah, it makes your books easy to sell too. And that's typically what I do when I have someone come into the shop and they're a newer reader, or they're a disillusioned big two reader, and they're getting tired of all the endless events and the illusion of change, and they realize that they've had the wool pulled out for, over their eyes for so long, and they're just like, and I always see it. I'm like, we're in danger of losing this person. Yeah. Or, we're in danger of not grabbing this person in. It's the number one thing I'll do is I'll do like, what are your favorite TV shows and movies? Mm-hmm. And just with a list of like 3 to 5 of those, I can point them into the books that they're going to like. I see it so often where people start off with superhero stuff. Yeah. They get kind of worn out by it, but then they get sucked right into the world of creator-owned material. And that's where the true love of the medium, I think, really starts coming out.
Absolutely. You know, I mean, I'm a third generation comics reader, right? So I come by it naturally. My mother was a comics fan. My grandfather was a comics fan. And so, yeah, of course, like I started off with like 90s Marvel, but I would come back in waves, and it would be if there was something creator owned usually, you know, whether it was, I mean, Dark Knight Returns is not creator owned, but it might as well be just because of how powerful the voice is behind it.
Yeah.
Or things like Spawn, or things like Why the Last Man. You know, those are the things that have really captured me. And yeah, I think I love superhero IP, and I think superhero IP is at its best when the creators are allowed to sort of put their stamp on it and really kind of lean into their voice, as opposed to kind of trying to spin the plates with sort of the least offensive, most bland, most status quo kind of storytelling. That it tastes like, you know, it's like paste, you know, it's just like, oh, okay, like I guess this exists, you know, it's a book, it has staples. But yeah, I feel like creator owned, it's incumbent upon us to be ambassadors for new readers. And it's not to say that there isn't space for the kind of weird esoteric stuff, but I think we need to also make sure that we don't forget what it was like to not be a comics reader.
Yeah.
I fully, firmly believe that everyone has a favorite comic, the same way that everyone has a favorite movie, TV show, favorite food. It's just, they might not know what it is yet. And I think already structurally as an industry, we have put so many barriers for people discovering this. I mean, the fact is that we've had 20 years of superhero movies that, for whatever reason, never tell anybody that comics still exist. You know, and you know, the people who do know comics exist, they don't know comic shops exist, or if they do, they've never stepped foot into it. And if they have, maybe they've had a bad experience. And maybe if they haven't had a bad experience, they just get overwhelmed because they see that there's, you know, 15 volumes of Spider-Man up at any given moment. Where do you start? That's hard. That's really tough. Whereas I think Kickstarter, you know, it's a very different planet with its own laws of physics. But, you know, Skies of Fire, for example, they're kind of a big success story for comics Kickstarter. They're on issue 7. It's still very easy to catch up. There are tiers where you can catch up with everything. I think that's something else that's really important. You don't have to worry about the extra shelf space. You don't have to worry about the about somebody's bandwidth. You can just say, oh, hey, that looks cool. How about I just catch up and get all of it? And I think that's, you know, by doing it just with a couple keystrokes, it is accessible in a different way. And hopefully, you know, if we can have more stories that are accessible like this, then hopefully the direct market can figure out a way to sort of leverage that pipeline and say, okay, like for the diehard fans, this is the deep well of content that you can go into, and that shouldn't change. That's still very forward thinking, and that still informs all the you know, films and television shows that we know and love. But just always remembering, how do we keep that new churn coming in? How do we keep those new readers coming in? You know, if there's a comic shop that doesn't have the first volume of Why the Last Man or The Walking Dead, what are you doing? Those should be, you know, or even Spencer and Locke. These are evergreen entry level titles that those are the things we should be pushing super hard day in and day out, as well as saying, oh, hey, for our diehard Wednesday Warriors, this is the latest thing going on.
Yeah. Yeah, because that gets very, like, it comes and goes. Sometimes you forget about it, right? What were you saying, Brian?
Oh yeah, it's like that's great stuff. And Robbie and I talk about that a fair amount. I've got 2 daughters, and I'm trying to get one into comics. And you go to the store and her first thing she thinks is the superheroes. And you know, I show her Wonder Woman, and she's tried it a little bit. And I've gotten some of the other ones, and she'll try them here and there, but it's a little daunting. And it's definitely better for girls now a little bit if you're trying to get your daughter into it. But there were a couple times I brought her in there, and I was kind of like,
yeah, I mean,
it's not very welcoming.
Yeah, you know, I mean, that was the whole reason I wrote Going to the Chapel for you know, just, you know, as an example, is I was kind of like, you know, I want to make sure I write a book that women like, you know. Mm-hmm. I think like, I know that's super basic, but I think that sometimes that level of thinking just doesn't appear. where I mean, right now, like, not to sort of talk too out of school, and hopefully I don't tick anybody off, but like Wonder Woman the movie was like a big cross quadrant hit. Women love that. What's the book targeted for? Who's the book targeted for at this point? I don't think I would say women at this point. I think making sure that like we're cognizant of just like basic demographics like women or people of color. I think we are very, very, very slowly starting to kind of like get that. And this is entertainment as a whole. This is not just comics.
Yeah.
But it's sort of like a no-brainer. We're so used to being like, this is the core demographic. These are the people that we got to pitch to. And the thing is, that core demographic, they want to support you. There are going to be toxic neckbeards out there, and screw them. Like, not like they don't have like tens of thousands of comics out there that already are hyper specifically catered to them. But like, why wouldn't you want to sort of widen your demographic a bit? To turn some of these toxic neckbeards on their heads a little bit, I'm sure their argument is, women or members of marginalized communities, they don't buy comics. And my response to that is, that's a failure of comics. And
they don't see themselves in it, right?
Yeah, they don't see themselves in it. They aren't being catered to. Maybe we should give that a shot and invite people to the table, because that's the thing. I don't think you have to be a specific member of a specific demographic to fall in love with comics.
Yeah.
So why not just bring as many people to the table and get them, give them the same pleasure of being hooked on comics that I've enjoyed my whole life.
Even if it's just for pure capitalistic reasons.
Yeah.
Like, you want as many people to buy your book as possible. It's a no-brainer to me.
I have said many times that, and this is why I try to have my characters be diverse of some kind, as long as I'm not veering into stereotype, which is the reason why we did not make Spencer and Locke. We did not headline that with a character of color. Is because we're dealing with the themes of child abuse and trauma. And if we reframed it as, this is African-American Calvin and Hobbes, obviously that would like veer into offensive stereotype, and it would totally like kill the message we're trying to come across.
Yeah.
But since that book, I've always thought to myself, like, okay, well, what's the harm of having a woman lead, or a person of color, or a member of the LGBT community? And as I've thought about that, I've realized, like, it doesn't just make moral sense; it makes creative sense, and like you said, Robbie, it makes business sense. Yeah. If you want to be a shark about it, there's no net negative here. And the positive is that means that you will have a book for everyone, and really that should be kind of the end goal of comics. Is we should be like film and television, where we should be able to hit the 4 quadrants, or however many quadrants you want to hit, instead of sort of digging down to this hyper specific niche.
Yeah, and there's a whole lot more of it nowadays. I mean, it's even this week alone, you had Lonely Receiver, you have Coffin Bound, and so that's really, really cool. And I think that over the last really like 5 to 10 years, it's really gotten better. I mean, I was around, and so was Brian, and so are you, in the 90s, in the 80s, in the early 2000s, reading comics, and it was almost kind of like a boys club in a way. Yeah. And so it's kind of nice to get out of that. And I have had my horizons widened through comic books in the last several years. So many great books. Pope has mentioned a few: Motor Girl, Strangers in Paradise, and a bunch, Motor Crush, and those, but back in the day, those were the rarity. And it's nice to see it start becoming more prevalent, that there are stories for everybody. Not everybody, not every comic is for everybody, but comics are for everybody, as they say.
That's what I was trying to say, getting excited about, is the kind of the expansion of the different genres in comics, because comics aren't a genre, it's a storytelling device in media that should be able to accommodate all the different genres. And I'm really grateful to see a lot of that expand. And I'm a big superhero fan myself too, but the older I get and the more I read, the more I really like the stuff that you're talking about, like with the emotional weight and dealing with issues and traumas and things like that. Because I grew up with Calvin and Hobbes when it was still in the newspaper, and I couldn't wait to get home from school every day to get the newspaper and read Calvin and Hobbes. And and I read your book. I was super excited. I see the snowman, right? And then he goes into space, and it's like I'm seeing all the things from the thing, but it's like, wow, this has got a whole lot more to it, and it's heavy, and I really like it.
Well, thank you. It's always I consider myself especially fortunate for the types of books that I work on, where it's all the benefits of a licensed book with none of the hassle and none of the red tape. I don't want to pick on superhero comics too hard in the sense that they are operating under different pressures and different scales and different criteria than I do. They have shareholders that they have to appease. They've got corporate bosses that say, Batman's on lunchboxes. Why am I seeing his penis in a book? They've
penis that changed the world.
That changed the world. There's continuity things that they've got to work within. They've got greater events that they've got to work within. So I get that that's like a whole different cog, like in a much larger piece of machinery that, I will also though add that can be sometimes a little dangerous for creators. It's like sticking your hand in the meat thresher and hoping you don't get pulled in. People like Donnie Cates are able to really kind of navigate that smoothly, but it's harder and harder, when you're doing it in half the time, with less artistic consistency, with rotating art teams, having to plan all that out. I'm lucky. I just get to say whatever story I feel like and whatever feels right, I get to tell it. I think there are a lot of creators out there who, based on whatever constraints that they're thrown under with the big two, they're not allowed to do that. I think a lot about Dwayne McDuffie. I thought about him a lot over the last 5 years, since I started kind of becoming a creator, thinking that he was so ahead of his time. He was the guy who tried to add representation to the Justice League. He didn't have consistent art teams. He kept, every time that he came up with an idea, the goalpost kept getting moved. And, at the time, people were pillaring him. His Justice League, as it was coming out, the reviews were not strong. But this was a guy who kind of kept persevering as long as he could until he was eventually removed from the title because he dared complain about it publicly. And, he was thrown all sorts of racist nonsense for daring to have a couple of characters of color in the Justice League. And, I wish he had lived to see where we're at today, which is by no means perfect. I think, our the discourse with even more Twitter has become perhaps toxic. But I think we have taken such steps in the industry itself, and with the stories that we've been able to tell and the characters we've been able to cultivate and the readers we've been able to reach out to. And so, it's something I think a lot about. And I think structurally, there are so many things to the industry where they're tied to the mast, so to speak, where they have to get a certain amount of books out at a certain amount of time, and they have to sell a certain number of those titles. So these are the levers they know how to pull, because these are the levers that have always worked, even if it's diminishing returns. As an indie guy, I don't have to worry about that. As an indie guy, I get to focus on, how do I become the best ambassador for comics I can be? How do I tell stories that can be accessible to a wide audience? How can I tell stories that are evergreen, that don't necessarily have that short and fast, oh, this is a big event, oomph? I get to tell stories that you pick it up a year from now, 5 years from now, it still has the same weight. And I think that's a different type of storytelling. It's kind of like the difference between running a marathon and running the 50-yard dash. There are different muscle groups that play here, different directives. I would hope, and I do think change is coming with the major publishers. I think COVID has seen to that, that it has been a big disruptive event that is forcing everyone in the industry to rethink how they do business. And so I hope that these companies, as they kind of do some soul searching, they figure out, okay, can we wean ourselves from the short-term gains in order to invest in the long-term games that will make these publishers sustainable long-term, that will make the industry sustainable long-term, that will make readerships sustainable long-term. And I'm only one creator. I wish I had a little more juice, but I think every creator should be thinking like this, and every creator should be thinking, what can I do individually on a grassroots level in order to promote the widest possible readership for the longest amount of time?
Yeah, I think DC has done some good work lately trying to do that, especially with their DC Black Label line. The bat pole aside, they that's kind of because DC's always to me been better at those kind of evergreen projects, like your Batman, Dark Knight Returns, your Batman Year One, your Watchmen, your is things like Transmetropolitan or Preacher, things like that can, Sandman, 100%. And I think they're still trying to do that, and you hear a lot from the community of that it seems like a lot of people, they just want things tied into continuity, and they kind of want the same recycled stories over and over. That's boring to me, like, not to bash on anybody, but like Walking Dead lost my interest because to me it was just the same thing all the time. And I love I think everybody here right now loves superhero comic books.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think we're in this industry because of superhero comic books. And I think superheroes really back in the day, they really captured young imaginations. Yeah. And there could be a better effort to actually try to get more books in the face of kids, in a cheap and affordable way. And you're seeing companies try to do that. DC's been doing it with their DC Comics for Kids or whatnot. Vault just announced Wonderbound today, which is the Myriad program. But, I think that's important. But getting it into people's faces, we used to, I don't know about y'all, but I bought my first comic books like at grocery stores or at convenience stores, things like that. You don't see that anymore, Right. And I think that's another approach that could be cool. It's not necessarily the really cool high marquee, super mature readers thing that's going to sit on the bookshelf forever. And that's great. But doing something for kids. Have you ever thought about doing a kid's book? I
have. In fact, I have written it. And we're just kind of getting our ducks in a row for art. But that is something that, and look, like I want to be clear. I don't think I have all the answers, because every time that I try something, I'm learning more, and I'm sort of figuring out, okay, I've checked these things off my bucket list. What can I add? And one of those things is actually, you just hit it on the head, was I was tired of going to conventions and not having anything that I could sell to children. I can give you a Spencer and Locke print, but that's pretty much all I can do without giving like an 8-year-old.
They don't need to read that.
And so I'm working on a superhero one shot with my Spencer and Locke collaborator, Jorge Santiago Jr.
Nice.
I have a long YA book that we're just starting to get the artwork on now. That somebody asked me what the anti-Pepose book would look like, of sort of the cuter, cuddlier version of something a little bit more adult. And I said, I've already written it. And so that Project Sweet Potato, I'm really excited about. That's a book that's been long in the works. It's the longest thing I've ever written. And we're starting to, we've got an artist whose schedule is starting to open up. And so he's able to finally start tackling it. Nice. But yeah, I think that's all part and parcel of, how do you bring more people in? And sometimes it's as adults because they have the disposable income to do so. And they can drive to a store to do it. I think a lot of times people don't realize that, like, kids, they're not all out buying stuff on their own. They got to get their parents to buy it for them, or they got to get their parents to take them to the comic shop. It's not even like you said, like when I was a kid, where I could go to my local grocery store and they had some issues of X-Men. They had some issues of Batman. My mom would go shopping and I'd sit in the comics aisle and I'd just read those. It brings me back. I wish we had that gateway. I don't know if we're ever going to get that gateway again. But I think with the rise of things like iPads and iPhones and smart TVs, everybody's got a comic shop in their pocket, or in their living room wall. So that's something that's another thing that I think is a cool gateway. is that, look, any dope can go on the internet, right? But the thing that I see for the direct market is Amazon's algorithms, at least for me, are kind of crap. They don't suggest anything to me that is ever accurate. I think that's where the comic shops, that's where it really is at, where it's like having human beings who know the material and know their customers and being able to
selling
say,
it. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's tough. It's a paradigm shift. It's because, look, I understand comics retailers have limited budgets, limited bandwidth, limited time. And there's always going to be jerks who, aren't going to appreciate being hand sold. It sucks. They're just going to say, leave me alone. I want my Spider-Man. I don't want to try anything else. And that's fine.
Yeah. I know who those people are. So I just leave them alone.
Yeah. But I think,
most of them complain about the books they read, by the way.
yeah. And look, I mean, that's our national pastime in the comics industry. I love our industry, but we read books with capes and tights and underwear on the outside. So sometimes a healthy dose of perspective is what we're lacking. But yeah, I think there are so many different ways to bring people in. And of course, there's no silver bullet. It's going to be like a bunch of silver bullets. There's no one size fits all. I mean, I see in one of the comments, for example, somebody saying I'd rather have physical books than downloads, and that's totally valid. I feel
me too, 100%. Me too.
I totally empathize with that. For me personally, I live in a 2-bedroom apartment, so my room is more limited. But like, there will be somebody who is not a diehard comics fan who that might be the reason why, is because they're like, oh, there's all these singles I can't keep up. And maybe they're trade waiters, or maybe they're trade waiters for digital. I don't think there's any wrong turns as long as they're reading, because eventually what will happen is, once they become regular readers, eventually, their tastes will deepen and mature. Not like a serial killer, but like, they'll just say like, oh, okay, I've read these books and I love these books, but like, what else is out there? And then that's where the specialty stores get to come in and say, oh, hey, by the way, you might not know about this book. Let me introduce you.
Yeah. And we all have those experiences where somebody did that, where they were like, I mean, I had an experience when I was in high school and I was reading all my superhero stuff. And then the comic shop guy, his name was Mike. He came up and he goes, have you ever read a book called Jinx or Goldfish? And I was like, no, what's that? And he's like, because I was into crime fiction, like hardcore. Yeah. And those were my favorite movies. I loved all the gangster stuff. I loved everything like that. And my indie comic book world I entered into it through Brian Michael Bendis's like crime fiction work back in the 90s.
Yeah.
And that's where I started. Whoa. And then I go out from there. The digital thing, at the risk of saying the word digital, which is anathema in the industry sometimes it seems, but like, you got to think about, we always talk about how when we were kids, we got hooked early. The newsstand was a big part of that. Even Spawn. I know you mentioned Spawn, and I'm a recent Spawn convert. After spending most of my life hating Spawn, I decided just to let go and enjoy it. And I'm 62 issues in, and I'm loving the hell out of it.
Yeah.
And it's but even Spawn was available on the newsstand. But it's a different world now. And if you look at kids and how they consume media, it's through their phones, it's through their tablets. And so digital is a great thing because of that. And digital readership continues to grow. It's nowhere near overtaking graphic novels
not even
or floppies at all, but it's growing. And most of the case, I would say 75%. And I'm not an expert on this, but in my experience, most people that get into things or back into comic books through digital always wind up in the shop, always wind up wanting physical.
Yeah, they I think they realize very quickly that they want more. They want something. And having advice is the best way to do it. I mean, especially like I used to read all my stuff through grocery stores, or Barnes and Noble was another place that I used to pick up a lot of trades. And it's sort of, you start realizing like, oh, there's so much more out there. And that's where the comic shops really, you know, there are some people who got to be taken to comic shops as kids. I wasn't really one of them. And I remember one of the very first comic shops I ever went to was Mile High Comics in Denver. And when I was a kid, you know, you see the ads for it, but then you see this giant place where it's literally filled wall to wall with the thing you love most. That's like going to Disneyland. Yeah. And, you know, any comic shop, you know, when you're an adult, it feels like a treat. And so, yeah, I feel like there's a lot. There's untapped potential throughout the whole industry, and I feel like comic shops are often thankless. You know, they're thankless operations where they're the ones sort of fighting in the trenches for every single book out there, whether it's superhero where they have to pay the rent, or if it's for indie guys like me. And so, yeah, I feel like there's so many different interesting angles that we can all take as creators, as publishers, as stores, as press. And I hope the pandemic sort of, once, you know, I hope after the initial fear washes past us, that we're able to say, okay, how do we make this more sustainable long term at every single angle? Because yeah, I want to be here for 30 years. I know you guys too. I want my kids to be able to read this stuff. And I think the best time to start planning for the future is now.
Yeah. Brian, what do you think about all that?
Yeah, it's
Brian's like, I disagree. I hate it. It's terrible.
Yeah. I'm logging off.
You are wrong, sir.
Yeah. No, like a lot of what you guys are saying. I do remember kind of going to the first, when I figured out that there were comic stores. Where I lived, there was only one, and it was just mind-boggling to me to see all these things and all these old things. And, you know, obviously I couldn't afford any of them, but it was really cool to look at and everything. And I was around during that first kind of that black and white boom, you know, so I remember, you know, seeing something like Cerebus, you know, and you know, like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and those black and white comics, just going, wow, this is really cool. And, you know, even then though, I mean, that was a huge kind of explosion of a bunch of things, but, you know, still getting like 90% superhero stuff, you know, and everything. But then, you know, came around for the Watchmen, and then, you know, cause I actually got that as it came out. I was a little young, so I think some of it kind of flew by me and everything, but, you know, that's where, you know, when that stuff started coming, when you mentioned Barnes and Noble, that's what I thought is like, that it wasn't until those things started coming out that you actually saw those in bookstores, you know, where you'd see actual collections of things. And you know, I thought that was a pretty big movement. And, I do like how, I do think, you know, digital definitely helps and gets some people in, and I know some people that are strictly digital, and I do get some digital stuff, but mainly it's the portability of it. Because like, you know, if I go on a trip, you know, I can take this iPad thing, right, instead of these hefty books, because, you know, for me, I can't go to sleep without reading at least one comic book at night. So, you know, I got to figure that out. But yeah, I'm really excited about these days, these past couple of years, like all these, it's, you know, all these indie titles and everything with all the different genres and everything. It's just, because, you know, I brought my wife up a couple times, but, you know, she doesn't like superhero stuff very much and everything like that, but I've been able to find stuff to actually, you know, say, hey, I think you'll actually like this one, you know, and, you know, and she tears through it and everything. And so it's a really exciting time, you know, and I really do think any way you can get people reading the books, you know, it's, you know, you got to try it all.
Yeah. We gotta be evangelists. You know, that's sort of where we're at right now is, you know, leave no stone unturned. You know, treat everybody like a potential comics fan. And if you do that and you're able to give them the right material, maybe they will be.
Yeah. There's a friend of mine, he said that he has trouble reading comics, and that's something else I think that we need to maybe help with too, I think, with folks, because if you don't start from a younger age, like the cadence and the kind of, you know, we all know we're supposed to read left and right, you know, and I mean, all that other stuff, but it actually still can be confusing, especially if you start in the 90s. with everything being a splash page and 17 things happen on one panel, it seemed like. But anyway, but that is one thing that the digital thing actually can help you with, at least on the Comixology app and some of those other apps. You can go into you can go into a guided view that actually steps you through the different things, but then you can back out. Because one of my favorite things about comics is that, comic creators that know how comics work, when you open up a page, your eye sees everything on that page. So when I use that guided view thing, like I'm always backing in and out because I want to see the page first, because it's typically designed to look at that way. And that's something else that I think, people that didn't grow up reading comics really, appreciate until you start figuring out all these tricks,
Yeah. I mean, and you hit the nail right on the head, is that, I distinctly remember starting to read books on Comixology. I had a long period where I lived in New York City. And so, I'd be reading most of my comics on my phone while I was commuting home. And it's a very different way of reading it, but it's no less valid. I remember reading Hawkeye's or Fraction's Hawkeye, I should say. Break that down panel to panel. Very interesting storytelling. Like reading it on a phone, I mean, of course, it's not the way that like the creators initially intended it any more than, somebody watching The Godfather and like their Nintendo Switch. But
full frame,
it's, but at the same time, like I can't be picky as a creator, so that's sort of, wherever people come in, whatever the pipeline is, I'm happy with it. And I think as we start to figure out what that is, then we can kind of be like, all right, how do we tailor things for that? And I see, like you said, DC's trying new things with their different lines for different age brackets, with trying things digitally, with their release schedules, because they'll have things that are digital and then they'll release it in print as sort of a standalone thing. Kickstarter's the same way, where I think it's very easy for us to say, oh well, if we do something digitally, it will cannibalize print sales. Or if somebody does Kickstarter, it's going to cannibalize the direct market. And that's not true. There is a little bit of overlap in the Venn diagram, but it's not a circle by any means. If anything, that's why I say, it's considered additive. And so, the thing that got me into Kickstarter in the first place is that somebody told me that there are people who primarily buy their books at comic shops. And there are people who primarily buy their books on Amazon or Comixology or what have you. And there are some people who buy their books primarily at cons. And so doesn't that stand to reason that there are people who primarily buy their books on Kickstarter? And isn't that an entire demographic that I had done zero outreach for?
Yeah.
And that was the thing that kind of made me say, oh, I have to do that.
Is the plan with the OZ to
ultimately, like, there are more readers. Yeah.
I was going to say, is the plan with the OZ
we're going to do, this is going to be the first.
You go ahead, David. There's a weird delay. You go ahead.
The plan with the OZ. Oh, okay. I was just going to say, for us, the plan for the OZ, this will be the first of 3 campaigns, and they're each going to be double sized. So I think our next campaign will probably be in February, and then our third one will probably be in June. And that way we're able to we're not chained to the month-to-month schedule. We're able to produce the work at the same level of quality that I want and Ruben wants and Whitney and DC want, but at a rate that's not going to make them have nervous breakdowns, and also doing so at a frequency that won't have me have nervous breakdowns, because boy, Kickstarter is hard. 3 of these is much easier than 6. And so, that's sort of the initial plan. And whether or not, the OZ ever sees a second life in the direct market, I would welcome that. We certainly we aren't there yet at this point, but it's early on. It's so weird to think that we're only 2 weeks into this Kickstarter. And so, I feel like that's the cool thing about Kickstarter these days, is that there are so many projects that get a second life in the direct market. And I don't see it as cannibalizing whatsoever. I see it as you have one set of readership that's right here, and then you've got another set of readership that's right here. There's not much overlap. Wouldn't you want to tap both of these types of readerships? So yeah, I feel like, as a creator who wants to future-proof himself, leaving no stone unturned is absolutely the way to do it. There's almost a bit of a reader diaspora, where they are cast out to all the different corners of reading pipelines. And our mission as an industry and as creators as a whole is to you have to do outreach to the four corners of the globe and say, okay, we're all meeting here. The creators are the conduits, because we don't have the advantage of, I'm never going to own Spider-Man, even if I'm lucky enough to write Spider-Man someday. There will be a beginning and an end to that. And even if I have a great tenure for Spider-Man's going to keep going. So I think creators themselves need to remember that, like, to a point, they're the brand, and they're the ones that can kind of unite all these disparate factions of readership, and sort of bring them together for a common goal. And wow, I just recited the theme of the OZ while talking about that. But yeah, it's bringing people together, because we can't expect the readers to do it themselves. And to be honest, I think publishers themselves are so busy just trying to kind of keep the lights on and keep everything moving. That's kind of how it goes. Let's see. Multiple covers seems more like cannibalization to overall readership. It's an interesting thought, Pope Cerebus the First, because it's there are some people who they really want all the different covers. That was something, we have variant covers for the OZ. Now, granted, it's very different than, say, having 20 covers, for a book, or having minimum order, buy-ins to get these sorts of covers. I do find that it's the industry, I think, sometimes can do things that the word exploitive comes to mind, where it's sort of there are people who have been conditioned for the speculator market who have said, okay, if this has X number of covers, I'm going for it, or I'm going to go for the super rarest thing, whether it's to try to flip it later, or it's just to say that I, as a collector, have everything. And so, yeah, I mean, it's, it's a tricky thing, and it's kind of, in my mind, as a creator, what limited control that I have, it's sort of like, okay, how do we do this in a responsible way? How can we have covers that do appeal to, our to different buyers? David Valentin brings up a great point, saying that it gives different artists different opportunities. That's sort of the way I always used to look at variant covers, is if somebody doesn't like Jorge Santiago Jr.'s cover, for example, maybe they'll love Monhouse's, or maybe they'll love Joe Mulvey's. It's just that little extra oomph to try to tip it over the net.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's one of those things. It's very easy to see it as exploitive. I mean, how many covers did Conan the Barbarian have? Where, like, at what point does it stop being additive and it starts becoming just trying to goose the numbers and trying to sort of, exploit the speculator market, so to speak. And
I'm not trying to call anybody out, but Marvel is like really bad with that right now.
Yeah.
And they do they do those variants where it's not even the character of the comic.
Yeah.
Sure.
Those are the ones that blow my mind. I'm like,
Speaking of variants, though, y'all, I just want to point this one out. Holy freaking cow!
Yeah, Monhouse,
dude. That cover.
I did the colors on that cover, so I'm
really. Very well done, my friend.
Yeah. But yeah, it's let's see. But for the buyer, it would take money away from buying other books. I mean, it's a catch-22, because similar to, you can, I've heard that argument made a lot on Kickstarter, for example, where you say, oh, well, if somebody doesn't buy one book, if somebody buys one book, that means that they're automatically taking money away from another book. And I've come to learn, I don't know if that's always the case. It is the case for sometimes. Of course, there's limited budget. There are some people that just have that budget and they're like, oh, well, I'm going to get all these covers, and it doesn't, the price is no object to them. And so those are kind of the ones those are the people that, to bring up your point, Pope, is that, yeah, it kind of worries me, is that like, yeah, like those people have deep pockets. And so people are going to try to tap them as hard as they can. The problem is eventually those guys are going to stop. Eventually those guys are going to realize they've been taken for a ride, or they're going to realize that these covers that they've put so much money in, maybe they're not the investment they thought they were. And so I think that's something that it's tough. It's challenging because I think so many publishers have hooked a lot on the speculator market. And it's not to say that there aren't opportunities to build numbers through that. But for me, at least as an individual creator, I care more about how many readers we have. If somebody wants to buy 20 copies of the OZ, God bless. But if they don't read any of them, I consider that a loss. And that's not to say that, you can't have 19 copies of the OZ that you want to slab. Like, that's fine. But I don't make these books to be collectibles. I make them to be stories. I
feel called out because I ordered 50 copies.
No, I'm just kidding. I mean, but I think sometimes we can lose sight of the forest for the trees. Yeah. And we say, oh, well, as long as we're hitting X number of sales for the books, that's all that matters. No, that's putting the cart before the horse. If nobody cares about the OZ as a story, if nobody cares about me as a writer, if nobody cares about Ruben Rojas as an artist, and if nobody cares about this story, what are we even doing here? Yeah. If you want to play the stock market, there are cheaper ways to do it.
Yeah, easier ways to do it too.
Be a stockbroker. So yeah, I think, and hopefully I'm touching upon what you were saying, Pope Cerebus. But yeah, it's just, I do think that it's easy to kind of veer into that thing of exploitation, and I get it. They got to keep the lights on. They got certain numbers that they, have to hit. But like I said, as an indie creator, it's not really my monkeys, not my circus. I get to kind of just focus on what's the best possible story to tell, and what do I think will kind of have the longest shelf life, and what do I think will be the most evergreen and accessible and universal. Because yeah, ultimately I don't want to have to rely on cover tricks to sell my work.
And remember, in a good trade paperback, all those covers are there, and so I always double dip. I got Going to the Chapel and floppies, and I've got it in trade paperback, and Spencer and Locke. I got the trade, but I got 2 in the trade and the floppies.
Thank you.
And I'll probably do the same thing here if you do a graphic novel collection. We've been talking a lot about indies. We've been talking a lot about the industry. Here's something I do want to ask. You kind of mentioned, I think I may know where you're going to go with this, but if the big 2 ever came a-calling, what would you like to do? What superhero mainstream IP would you like to tackle and make your imprint on?
I got 3. Shazam is number 1 with a bullet, and I know the guy who wrote Spencer and Locke, you wouldn't think he'd be the guy who would want to write Shazam, but I could write Shazam for 10 years.
Dude, to me that's exciting as hell. I was like, the guy that did Spencer and Locke doing Shazam? Hell yeah.
I think there's a hope to Billy Batson, and there's, like, we were talking about the universality of it all. What's the story of Billy Batson's first kiss? What's the story of him learning how to drive? What's the story of him cutting class with Freddie Freeman? The DC characters in particular, but I see superheroes in general. It's the Paul Bunyan effect. You take characters doing what we consider to be ordinary, but you scale it up to superhuman levels.
Yeah.
And so, Spider-Man, for example, he's not just like late for a date, but he's like fighting with the Vulture all over town while Mary Jane is waiting with theater tickets. I think Billy Batson in particular has so many universal moments that I think we all look back on and we all feel a soft spot towards. I see him as he should be front and center for DC's publishing operations. He's very similar to Avatar: The Last Airbender. Sort of Aang's kind of coming of age with superpowers. It's the same thing with Shazam.
Yeah.
I think on the Marvel side, Doctor Strange. I love the characters with magical abilities. It's the same reason I gravitated towards fantasy with the OZ, is that you're able to take so much metaphor and theme and wrap it around the character. That's the best part about magic. Sci-fi, you have to set the world, the rules of the world, and the characters have to navigate it. Fantasy, it's the opposite. I will say, last but not least, he is my white whale. I say it every time somebody asks me if there's a licensed pitch that I would want to do, because I don't know if or when I'll ever get the chance to do it. Is Captain Planet.
Oh, dude, what? Yes.
Captain Planet is my white whale.
Nice.
I was just talking to somebody about it today, where Captain Planet was ahead of its time by like 30 years. It's inherently international. It's inherently diverse. It has a political point of view that I think is very timely in today's world. The intersection between environmentalism and capitalism and corruption and finance is super important. All of these characters have very distinct personalities and drives and power sets. I've said my Captain Planet would be the first Avengers movie meets Avatar: The Last Airbender. It is literally the only thing you need to do to make Captain Planet work for today's audience, besides some very minor touching up of the character backstories, is give Captain Planet full pants. That's pretty much it. He just needs the most minor of redesigns for his costume to sort of fit in the 21st century.
Get rid of the mullet.
Get rid of the mullet.
That's coming back.
But yeah, there is so much you could tell that really keys into today's moment. And so, yeah, I fingers crossed every time I have a meeting with a publisher, it's the first thing I tell them is, if you ever get the rights to Captain Planet and you don't ask me to do it, I'm going to be really upset.
I was about who's got the rights to Captain Planet? I'm going to email them every single day.
Well, it was Ted Turner's baby, and so they're probably part of that DC Warner Brothers umbrella. Yeah. But with DC having shrunk its line down, and with Ted Turner, I think, being very possessive of Captain Planet, he helped spearhead it. He helped develop it. He thought of it as the greater good to teach kids about environmentalism through superheroes. I don't know who would have the rights to that. I don't know if they would ever think of licensing that out to Boom or IDW, but yeah, I feel like that is a character that there's so much cool stuff. It does not require much to bring that property into the 21st century. The same way that, and sorry if I'm again blaspheming by saying this, I really liked the first J.J. Abrams Star Trek movie.
Me too.
I didn't have a ton of familiarity with Kirk and Spock. I was a Next Generation kid. And so that slight recontextualization of those characters, suddenly I was like really invested. It was character driven. And so I was like, oh, this is super cool. Now I get why people like this series so much. It didn't take a whole lot to bring that into the 21st century. And I feel the exact same way about Captain Planet. So write your congressman, tell your friends, tweet all the companies, tell them that you want David Pepose to write Captain Planet, because I promise you, I've got a pitch for that will make your toes curl and your heart sing.
You blew me away with that one. That's a good one. That's really
good. The look in your face when I said it. It's been my white whale for a long time.
That's a toy collection that I'm going to eventually try to capture, is the Captain Planet line. I love that shit when I was a kid, man. That's awesome. There were a lot of those environmentalism things in the early 90s, like there was a big movement then, and it kind of fizzled out a little bit, but it's perfectly primed to come back. Something like Captain Planet, Toxic Crusaders. Yeah, you work on the Captain Planet pitch. I'll work on the Toxic Crusaders pitch.
We'll do a crossover.
Bruh.
Yes.
Bruh. Can you imagine that? And if David never gets to do Captain Planet, you'll see Colonel Earth coming soon from him, I'm sure.
Never say never. But yeah, I just there's so much cool stuff to tell with those characters, and I think it really, you couldn't think of a more timely 90s property than Captain Planet today.
Yeah, you're 100% right on that. That's you blew me away. I thought you were about to say Spider-Man.
Oh, I mean, I do.
Captain Planet. I'm like, what, bro, dude?
I see somebody in the comments saying that Captain Planet had a Marvel run. Oh yeah, they had a 12-issue series in '91. That's cool. I did not know that. So thank you for who said this, Justin. Thank you so much for the heads up. Now I'm gonna have to try to find those now.
I have to hunt it down now.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know who else has a 12-issue run at Marvel from the 90s is James Bond Jr. I have every issue of that. So just saying.
It's funny. I do have a James Bond Jr. pitch in my back pocket.
Bro, we're like best friends now, man.
Yeah.
If you like Street Sharks, it's over, man. We're just like.
I need to come up with a Street Sharks pitch, but yeah, I wrote a teleplay a while back. And as I wrote it, I realized like, oh, this is a James Bond Jr. pitch, and I just did not know that. So yeah, it's how do you make James Bond Jr. sexy? And I think that's very, very easy to do. You get a little Pretty Little Liars in there, you get a little Riverdale. It's that series would be fun as hell.
Now, I know Brian's a big James Bond fan. Brian, are you a big James Bond Jr. fan? It was short-lived, but it was impactful.
It might have been older when that one came out. I remember that, but I don't
You're
remember.
A little bit older than me and David.
A little bit.
Sure. Just a wee bit.
When you're done with this, when we're done here, go on YouTube and watch that theme song because it'll stick in your head for the rest of your life.
Yes, it will.
Okay, I'll check that out. But I'll typically try anything James Bond. I've always loved that world. So,
Brian, I just noticed, is your chair the same color as your wall?
No, it's a really old green chair.
It just really
green.
It like blends into one. I always give Brian shit because of his puke colored wall there.
Yeah,
but
I do need to.
He hung up more stuff on purpose.
Yeah. It finally gave me the impetus to actually get some of the artwork up on the wall. So, Yeah,
you got some good stuff there. There's a Kickstarter tier where you can get some original artwork from Ruben, I think. So you've got 12 days to go on this Kickstarter. You've got 940 something backers. You have gone beyond the goal. Yes. Do you feel like you just have all the power in the world right now, David?
It's funny for me. I have a nasty habit of always moving the goalposts, and so for me, when I started this Kickstarter, people were saying aim conservatively because you've never done a Kickstarter, you don't know the data. So our 6,000 initial goal was about enough to pay for most of the art costs. I figured I was just going to kind of eat the print costs, and that'd be fine. It'd be enough to have something for people to enjoy. Nobody tells you what to do when you blow through your goal in 2 hours, or hit 300% in the first day. And so for me, what's been a fun challenge and a fun learning curve is we want to keep building that readership. I think if anybody's been listening to this for the last hour and a half, I'm not in this for the money. I'm in this for the readers. So the money that we've earned is going towards our second and third issues, which are going to be double sized. So when you put it like that, and then you add in printing costs and shipping costs, I promise I'm not getting rich off this. So for me, it's been, how do we keep adding value to the book? How do we sort of keep offering new things to keep readers invested and interested and continue to add more bang for your buck? So, for example, this first issue is 44 pages. We are doing enhanced covers. We're talking with the printer now about what seems feasible. Right now, we're leaning towards doing some raised UV for Ruben Rojas's main cover, but we're trying to see if there's any sort of metallic or foil variant we might be able to add as well to that. It'll kind of depend on on how it works with the art.
Bro,
you know,
you just come on, man. We got to do that.
Yeah, if we can make it work with that art, I would love to do that. We've got pinups that we're adding to the book. That's literally the last thing I'm doing right now is we're waiting for one more pinup to get colored. We've got our the PDFs for Spencer and Locke #1 and Going to the Chapel #1. So for $10, you're already getting 88 pages of story from me. You're also going to get my script. We've got behind the scenes of my scripts, and for an extra $5, we're also throwing in Ruben's raw inks and Whitney Kogar's untouched colors. That's just the digital side of the equation. We've also got a digital comics extravaganza, which we've successfully unlocked as a stretch goal. So we've got PDFs from a dozen indie creators. So you're going to be just for $10, you're getting hundreds of pages of story. You're going to be getting stuff from Justin Jordan and Rylan Grant and Frank Gogol and Kevin Eastman, the co-creator of the Ninja Turtles.
I was going to ask how that felt when Eastman threw in his support for you.
Huge. If only 7-year-old me could have known what was going to happen, he would have fainted. It was Eastman has been a hero of mine for a long time. Ninja Turtles was that was my fandom. And I remember reading those originals as a kid and being like, whoa, this is hardcore. I did not know based on the cartoon that this is where it came from. And loving the movies. And I remember dragging my mother to take me to a Ninja Turtles concert as a kid.
Oh man.
So
you saw them come out of their shells, man?
I saw them come out of their shells in St. Louis. So yeah, I come by it all honestly. Oh, we lost Robbie. He'll pop back on. But yeah, I love the Ninja Turtles. Okay, you're back. We lost you for a second.
Yeah, I hit the wrong button. I'm sorry. It happens sometimes.
But yeah, it was also I think Eastman, his remixing, the Turtles at their core are a remix. And I think that really kind of shaped my own ethos as a creator. And so being able to say, oh yeah, like you can take a little bit of peanut butter and a little bit of chocolate and, you don't have to invent them. You just can be the idiot who puts them together. That's really empowered me as a creator. So to have Kevin have our backs, it was a pinch me moment. I could not have been more enthused or excited for that. So yeah, I think that was particularly cool. And I think a feather in my cap that I never knew I wanted. But we've got the digital comics extravaganza. We've already unlocked our first stretch goal, which is all physical backers will get a comic-sized print from Kira Okamoto, our Yellow Brick Road Warrior print. It's pretty exciting. We are coming up to our next stretch goal, where all physical backers will get a Winged Monkey Squadron sticker. I think we are a little over 200 away from that goal. So I'm hoping by end of the weekend we'll hit that. Yeah, we've got some more fun stuff planned as well. I've actually just set up today what I called a social stretch, or a backer stretch goal. I want to build the Emerald Army strong. So I've said if we hit 1,000 readers, I will also record a behind the scenes commentary.
Cool.
For the book. So that way people really get into the thick of it and really get to know kind of every little nook and cranny and detail that went into this book.
There's that sticker.
There's the sticker.
That is so dope.
Thank you so much. I designed that
Nice.
using Ruben Rojas's artwork. So yeah, for people who want more, we've got variant covers, or 4 different covers, I should say. We've got Ruben Rojas's main cover, Mon House's cover, which you mentioned earlier. Rio Burton has an amazing movie poster style cover, and then Kenneth Wagnon did his Akira homage. I love the story behind that cover because he's busy working on another comic right now. And I have been trying to get to do work with him for a long time. And I had hit him up only a couple months prior with a 6-issue mini that I was like, oh dude, you'd be killer at this. And he's like, man, I'm working on like a full a full series right now. I don't have time for this. And so when I decided, okay, we're going to do this Kickstarter, we're going to do the OZ, I need variant covers. I pinged him on Facebook, and I think Kenneth was like, I already told you no, like, I don't have time. And I was like, wait, no, Kenneth, hear me out, buddy. I want to do an homage to the Akira slide, except it's a Humvee and the driver's door has been ripped off and Dorothy's shooting at the driver's side and the Tin Man is riding on the back, firing out of his wrist cannons. And he was like, oh, you pegged me good, didn't you? So yeah, I have the original to that. I was so excited when he sent it my way. I asked him how much for the original. We've got, I think we might be out of commissions and Skype sessions with me, but we did have Skype sessions with me, and I'm sure one of them will pop up before the end of this campaign. So just keep your eye on it. Ruben Rojas has a sketch card featuring Dorothy Gale's original design. So we've got a tier for that. We've got retailer discounts. So if you are fighting in the trenches at a comic shop, we wanted to make it easier on you guys. So we have 50% discount for our retailers. We've got deals for
you may be carrying it at the deep then.
Yes, please. I was going to say, tell your comic shop owners if they aren't aware of this campaign, we do have a retailer deal. So just to hit that tier, and we'll send them copies under that. Let's see. We've got deals involving my previous trades. Spencer and Locke 2 and Go Into the Chapel. We've got bundles involving those. We got bundles involving all 4 covers. If you buy all 4 covers, you get it for the price of 3. And then I will say the creme de la creme. This is sort of our most premium tier. People have asked me for years, are you ever going to do Spencer and Locke plushies? And I had 10 of them handmade for my creative team as a thank you gift. We have 2 left. And so we have our King of the Jungle package, which you get one of our last remaining Spencer and Locke dolls. You get to own a piece of history. It's something that there will never be any more of these dolls. Our doll maker is out of the game. So this is it. But yeah, I figured for the people who are Spencer and Locke super fans who want a piece of that history, this is your chance. I see a question from David. How did you come up with your perspective of the Land of Oz? And yeah, I mean, for me, there were a lot of influences that went into it. I'm a big fan of the game Fallout. That was certainly, big into that. Love the aesthetic for Mad Max Fury Road. That certainly went in there. I think, those fit really nicely against something that's as fully realized and fantastic as The Wizard of Oz. The iconography visually of that series because it's cultural osmosis. You all watched the Judy Garland film. And so it doesn't take a whole lot to throw in a post-apocalyptic military vibe to it. And that's actually been some of the most fun moments that I've had writing the series. It's not just, recasting, say, the Tin Man as somebody who's been destroyed and rebuilt so many times that he's been turned into this freedom fighter. But even bits like, the Wizard of Oz's balloon. Not many people would see that as a platform for a Halo drop, but Dorothy would, because she has that military background. And that's been kind of some of the more fun things for me. I've noticed that if there's anything that I like in my books, it's apparently unorthodox friendships and improvised weapons. And so the OZ has been really good for me for doing both of those things. But yeah, so much of it, and this is the same way with Spencer and Locke, is not everybody's expecting you to hit every single touchstone. But there are certain ones that pop out at you more than others. And those are always the ones you kind of want to try to hit first. And then you kind of think, okay, like what's like the craziest version of this, And I think the strength of the Wizard of Oz is that the biggest touchstones of the characters, Scarecrow, Tin Man, Cowardly Lion, they all have very distinct visuals and character arcs and desires and personalities. Any of them could stand alone. They could hinge a standalone story with any one of them, but you put them in the same room together and sparks start to fly. It's kind of iron sharpens iron. And the thing is, the war has not just affected Dorothy. Her time in Iraq has certainly shaped her. But that's the cool thing about the series to me, is that war has touched all of these characters, and seeing how they've changed and what's happened to them. It's a cool way of exploring those character arcs that we had in the original Wizard of Oz. The Tin Man, for example, he's a guy who wanted a heart. What happens to that heart when you've watched your friends die in front of you and been the sole survivor all these years? Or the Scarecrow, a guy who wanted a brain. What happens to the smartest guy in the room when he realizes he doesn't have the answers? And also, if you've ever watched Elon Musk, anybody who calls himself a genius also is filled with ego. What happens to this egotist when he keeps coming back to the Rubik's Cube and he can't solve it? What does that do to the man? Or the Lion, somebody who wanted bravery. How does that calculus change when you're not just fighting for yourself anymore? What happens when you're the king of the animal kingdom? How does bravery look then? And so, it's been very fun to kind of tackle these characters, not just changing them up visually, but also just changing them up emotionally. And I think that taps into a similar vein that we did with Spencer and Locke. Is time is a powerful thing. And it's in part so powerful because it's irrevocable. There's no reversing the clock. There's no going back to these ideals of yesteryear. You've been dragged through the war and the muck, and it changes you. And seeing how these characters have changed and still look at the past with these rose-colored glasses and say, is there a way to get any of it back? That's something that I think we can all relate to in today's day and age. And I think if it were me, I would argue that, yeah, some of those values are worth fighting for, and some of them are worth leaving in the past. And it's kind of our everyday struggle as individuals and as a people to figure out what's worth carrying with us and what's worth leaving behind.
I like that. And all those characters, there's a little bit of each of those inside of us. And yes. I really like the way you put that. I'm super excited for this book, to see you explore this world that you've created through the lens of Oz. And I am pumped. And we're nearing the end of the show. So before we get into the final question, Brian, I'm throwing it to you one more time. What is there anything else you want to talk about or bring up, Brian?
Well, I am very grateful that it's going to be 3 Kickstarters too, because I was like listening to your idea and some of your explanations of it. I was like, I don't know. I was thinking 44 pages might not be enough.
Yeah, no way. I can tell you, I've written, I believe this series will be 140 pages.
Great.
So yes, we got plenty of story for you. I promise.
Yeah, and I was pretty excited too. When you were mentioning all the different perks with the Kickstarter is the digital inks, going along with it, and the colors and everything. That's really, it's like you're giving a complete set of the behind the scenes for the for the comic. Yeah. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm a process nerd, and so I'm always curious about kind of the behind the scenes. I think that's what helped empower me to decide to maybe try writing. So I figure that's kind of the fun of Kickstarter, is there are things you can distribute digitally that are absolutely no skin off your nose. It does not blow up your shipping operation. So for me, that's been like, okay, well, how do I do that? What else can I add that will make things fun for our readership?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I guess, I don't know. I'm just really excited to see it. And, I'm really grateful you're making a lot of comics that, easy to recommend to lots of different folks.
Thank you.
All right, David, the last question is the question I ask every single one of our victims here. Me personally, I'm really into paranormal type stuff and unexplained phenomena and all that kind of stuff. So I'll ask you this same question I've asked a lot of people. Have you ever had an otherworldly experience, whether it's like, say, seeing lights in the sky or a ghost, or you came across Bigfoot? I don't know. You're out in California, right? Crazy things happen out there. Have you ever had anything along those lines happen to you that you want to share?
I have. So, this is a story that means a lot to me. So for anybody who follows me on social media, our pup Holly passed away just before the pandemic started, and she was my family's dog. I took her in right around when the first volume of Spencer and Locke came out, so we had her for about 3 years, and she had cancer for that last year, and we nursed her through almost a year of treatment, and it was one of those things. We did everything we could to keep her with us, and I feel like we went through a lot to try to keep her happy and comfortable. And so I feel very fortunate that she really only had one bad day, and she passed in her sleep that night, the day after her 14th birthday. And it's funny, I get emotional just thinking about it. I remember asking, my spirituality is all over the place, and I don't know if I believe in an afterlife for us, but I do for dogs. I feel like dogs deserve it. And I remember distinctly saying that next day, Holly, I'm sure you're having fun up there, but like, if you have a moment to just let us know you're okay. And the next day, I remember waking up, there was this bright light outside of our door, and it was like crack of dawn, like never, like we don't get light like that. And I distinctly remember waking up with this bright light, and it's where Holly used to stand every morning to growl at us to take her out for a walk. And I kind of knew, oh, okay, she heard me. So yeah, that is kind of the big paranormal moment that I can think of. And it was just, a few months ago, but it's one that, I think my spirituality and my religiousness is often a moving target, but that's something that's really filled me with a lot of comfort. So I can say, I get to honor her in my work, and people will get to see that hopefully relatively soon.
Well, thank you for sharing that. That was
That's great.
I completely get that, man.
Yeah.
I've lost a dear pet not too long ago, and I feel that, and it's nice to have that moment. So thank you so much for sharing that, David.
Yeah, of course. So no Bigfoot yet, but fingers crossed. I'm still fairly new to California, only been here a few years. So
you got to get up further north, I think, for the Bigfoot sightings, I think.
Yeah, they're not patrolling Miracle Mile at this point. But who knows? Climate change, it could happen.
It could.
But thank you guys so much for having me, and for everyone listening. It's Kickstarter, so every backer matters, every dollar counts. We're very close to our next stretch goal, but like I said, for me, it's not about the dollar count. It's about getting our readership. I want us to break 1,000 readers before this campaign ends. I think we've got every possibility of making that happen. But everybody listening, please check out the Kickstarter. Please tell your friends. The Emerald Army does not survive without you. And so every single person who spreads the word, Robbie and Brian for taking the time to chat with me, it is hugely important. But yeah, spread the word, because you might think the Wizard of Oz, but this is the story of what comes next. So join us, become a Yellow Brick Road warrior, and follow us in the trenches of the OZ.
No better way to end it than that. Thank you guys so much for joining us. David, thank you for being here. Brian, thank you for being here. And if you need help repainting that wall, just let me know. I got some good choices picked out for you. So, but anyway, thank you so much. Like I said, there is a link below in the description to the Kickstarter for the OZ. You definitely have to check it out. You owe it to yourself that way. If you have any kind of respect for any of my opinions about comic books and what to get into, this is definitely something to look out for. And if you've never read Spencer and Locke book 1 and 2 and 3 coming up, and I'm very excited for that, and Going to the Chapel, David's work is amazing. I appreciate him being here. PCP Army, I appreciate you being here. Coming up here real quick, next week on the channel, we start Horror Fest on Friday night with our look at Lost Boys. So be here Friday night for a live discussion. Join the conversation. We'll be talking about Lost Boys, kicking over a month and a half of horror movie coverage as we do here at PCP. And tomorrow night, we're doing Bill and Ted Face the Music. We gave you all a week to watch it. tomorrow night, 9 p.m. Central here on the channel. We'll be doing a live discussion of Bill and Ted Face Music. And spoilers, I think it's awesome. Probably going to give it 5 you digs. I absolutely love it. We love you. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for rocking with us. Peace.